What is up, everybody? I am Kevin Ioli. Thank you for joining me. We're just a few days away from UFC 309. Main event, of course, on Saturday at Madison Square Garden in New York. The heavyweight championship fight between Jon Jones, the reigning heavyweight champion, the man many consider the greatest fighter of all time, against the man many consider the greatest heavyweight champion in UFC history, Stipe Miocic. That is your main event. I want to take a look, though, at Jon Jones's rise to power, how Jon became this dominant champion, and talk a little bit about how we got to where we are with this fight, and what you might want to think about where Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic are right now in their MMA journeys. So, how do we get this fight? Well, Jon Jones fought Cyril Gane at UFC 285 on March 4th, 2023 in Las Vegas. The UFC had released Francis Ngannou, who was the heavyweight champion. He won the title at UFC 270 in Anaheim, California, when he defeated Gane by decision in that 5-round fight at the Honda Center. Ngannou wanted to box. The UFC would not let him box. There was very contentious negotiations, and in January of 2023, Dana White said he had had enough, and he released Francis Ngannou from his contract, basically making his heavyweight champion a free agent. Important to note here that Jon Jones had already agreed at that point to fight Francis Ngannou for what would have been Ngannou's heavyweight championship, but that fight never came off because Ngannou left. Of course, he signed with the PFL after he took 2 boxing matches, losses to Tyson Fury, in which he knocked Tyson Fury down and then got knocked out by Anthony Joshua. He came back to the PFL and won their Super Fight League championship in October when he dominated Renan Ferreira and finished him in the first round. So the UFC decided when Jon Jones won that they would grant his request. He called out Stipe Miocic. The UFC said, yes, we will grant that request. Now, it got a little sideways because Jon got injured in October of last year, just a couple of days before the fight was supposed to happen, tore a pectoral muscle, needed surgery, and hasn't been able to compete until now. The UFC made an interim championship fight at that point. Tom Aspinall knocked out Sergey Pavlovich in the first round, and he became the interim champion. So now that leaves us with Saturday night's fight. But I want to go back for a second to the most remarkable run that I can think of in MMA. There were a lot of guys that had great runs, Anderson Silva, Fedor Emelianenko, many others, Habib, George St. Pierre. There were so many of them. But I think what Jon Jones did in 2011 and 2008 is really unparalleled and put him in the position that he's in now, where he is widely regarded as the greatest fighter who ever lived, and is clearly on his way to being in whatever MMA Hall of Fames there are. Certainly, he will be a member of the UFC Hall of Fame when he is done. But whatever Hall of Fames there are for mixed martial arts, if Jon Jones isn't in it, that Hall of Fame is not worth talking about. But in 2011, Jones went 4-0 with 4 really difficult fights. He fought a number 1 contenders fight, basically. It wasn't labeled that at the time. Little did we know when that fight happened that Rashad Evans had gotten injured and he wasn't going to be able to fight Mauricio Shogun Rua the next month for the light heavyweight championship. So what the UFC did that night, they had Ryan Bader fighting Jon Jones. Both guys were highly regarded prospects. Ryan Bader was 12-0. And the UFC decided, hey, whoever wins this fight, we will offer that fighter the opportunity in the ring afterwards if he wants to fight Shogun Rua the following month. It was about 5 weeks for the championship. Jon Jones submits Ryan Bader in the second round and is offered the fight. He accepts it, and he goes on and defeats the following month Shogun Rua to become the UFC light heavyweight champion. He then makes 2 more defenses in 2011. He defends the belt against Quentin Rampage Jackson. He submits Rampage at UFC 135 on September 24th, 2011. That fight was in Denver. And then in one of the most famous finishes in the UFC, UFC 140, he's fighting Lyoto Machida, chokes him out with a guillotine. When Machida goes out, Jones releases the hold, and Machida just collapses to the ground. That made him 4-0 with 4 finishes. He won a number 1 contenders fight. He won that light heavyweight championship, and then he defended it twice. But then he goes in to 2012 and he fights Rashad Evans, who the previous year was supposed to fight for the belt. Rashad Evans was 17-1-1 at the time. John defeats him, then goes on and submits Vitor Belfort and wins that. And I think that 6-fight stretch right there, in which he goes 6-0 with 5 finishes, is why John is regarded as the greatest. Yes, he continued to win. He is 27-1 now. His only loss came on a disqualification against Matt the Hammer Hamill. He was about to finish Matt Hamill, hit him with the infamous 12-6 elbow. He got disqualified. And so here we are with Jon Jones going into this fight with Stipe Miocic with a 27-1 record as opposed to 28-0, which probably rightly should be and was on his way to being. But he broke a rule, and here we are. But here's what's interesting about that run. Counting the losses to Jones, right? Fighters after they fought him went 13-21. So even if you eliminate the 6 losses that they had to Jones, those guys, they were 13-15. They were under 500. John puts that kind of beating on guys. He is just a freak athlete and has the ability to do things that few other human beings can do. And certainly, we see some great athletes in MMA, but these guys cannot do what Jon Jones does, and he just delivers so much punishment and wins these fights so convincingly. As he goes on in his career, he kind of was fluctuating. He has that fight at UFC 165, a phenomenal fight with Alexander Gustafsson, but we later learned that Jones was partying and basically didn't even train for the fight. He falls behind in the fight, then he comes back and he ends up winning. Both guys ended up in the hospital. That was just a phenomenal fight, one of the best fights that I have ever personally been at. After that, he beats Glover Teixeira, who would later go on to become the light heavyweight champion. He beat Daniel Cormier, who would later go on to become not only the light heavyweight champion, but the heavyweight champion. Has a win over Ovin St. Preux. He then fights DC again, and he knocks DC out. That fight was changed to a no contest because Jones's test had some picograms of banned metabolite. So he lost that win, but he did win the fight. He goes out, rematches Alexander Gustafsson, blows him out, dominates Anthony Smith, then has close fights with Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes before he goes out there and destroys Cyril Gane. So I don't think we see much slippage in Jon Jones, right? I mean, if you look at that, I heard an interview where Daniel Cormier said this week that for his fights against Jon Jones, he put everything he had into those fights. He gave the best. He had the best training camp. He performed as well as he could in the fights, and he got knocked out in one, and he lost a decision in the other. He didn't have the best camps, he said, in all of his fights with Stipe Miocic. He said if he had the same camps that he had for Jones against Miocic, he would have won all those fights against Miocic. That's obviously Daniel's opinion, but he's one of the great fighters of all time as well. He's been in there with both guys and a very smart MMA mind, and he knows. So all that makes me wonder, there are certain fighters that you come across in boxing or MMA who they are guys that people are not necessarily crazy about fighting, because not only do you feel it on fight night, but you feel it long afterwards, and it robs you of something. And there are guys like that, like Bernard Hopkins, the former boxing longtime middleweight champion. He went on to hold the light heavyweight title for a while. He would hit you with those body shots, and people say they were feeling those punches years later, right? He just took a little starch out of all the people that he fought. And when you look at that, that's the same thing that is true of Jones, right? And so, as I mentioned before, the opponents after they fought John Jones are 13 and 21 in that 2012, 2011, 2012 stretch when John, in my opinion, was at the peak of his craft. Um, just amazing because all of those guys were elite championship level, Hall of Fame level fighters, with the potential exception of Ryan Bader. And Ryan Bader certainly went on to have a very good career. Bader won the Bellator Light Heavyweight Championship, later added the Bellator Heavyweight Championship. You know, you can't knock Ryan Bader, but all those other fighters that Jones beat, you know, all really, really good UFC light heavyweight champions, elite fighters, and John just destroyed them. And he's gone on and done that to other people as he's going. And that makes me wonder, when you look at John going up against Stipe Miocic, a Stipe Miocic who has not fought since March of 2021, who has not won since August of 2020. Um, you know, he had some personal tragedy in there. His father died in 2022. So, of course, he couldn't fight. When John had to pull out of the fight in New York last year, Stipe was offered a fight with Tom Aspinall, but Stipe preferred to fight Jones. So he declined that fight. So the UFC made Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich for the interim heavyweight championship. And Tom Aspinall won that convincingly with a first round knockout and then defended it convincingly with a first round knockout over Curtis Blades. So here we are. I just wonder, is Stipe Miocic going to be able to handle the kind of punishment that John Jones is going to give out? It's a guy that hasn't been fighting recently. I have no doubt that he worked hard in the gym, that he pushed himself, that he will tell everybody who asks that he had a great training camp. You know, and don't they all say they had the best training camp ever, right? But I have no doubt that Stipe prepared the right way. But when you haven't been around for a while and then you face a special guy like Jones, a guy that is going to deliver that kind of punishment, what impact is that going to have on his body as he's taken that during the fight? Um, it's something I think that needs to be watched. But John John Jones, I like Jones to win this fight, and I think he's just one of those special guys. Now, this is a very difficult matchup for him, especially. I'm gonna kind of put an asterisk by this. If Stipe was fighting on a regular basis and he had more than one fight in the last 3+ years, I think we would sit here and say I think it's 44 months, if I'm not mistaken, since Stipe has last been in the octagon. I think we would be talking about, hey, this matchup is a very difficult match for John Jones. Stylistically, Stipe has everything he needs to win this fight. Certainly, John is not the biggest knockout puncher. You know, John will hurt you when he hits you, but John, you know, his punches are not going to, you know, he's not going to one punch Stipe Miocic, right? Miocic has wrestling. I think Miocic, you know, if he were active, would be a very, very, very strong dark horse opponent for John Jones. But if you look at the DraftKings numbers, John Jones is just a huge, huge favorite in that fight. He's -700. Stipe is +500, and it's just going up, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if by fight night or at some point later in the week we get to 8-1 Jones being favored. That would not surprise me whatsoever. Um, I think it would have benefited Stipe had he taken a fight, had he maybe thought this through and fought Tom Aspinall last year. Now you might say, well, yeah, look at Aspinall has done. He's in the middle of this incredible run, and if Stipe had taken the fight, Aspinall would have beaten him, and he would not be getting this fight against John Jones. And that may well be true. But I think when you look at it, it was a different Tom Aspinall going into that fight with Pavlovich in November than it would be now, right? He was on an amazing run, no question about it. But he had just come off a win over Marcin Tybura, his first fight back, after he had injured his knee against Curtis Blades in 2022. We didn't know about that knockout to Pavlovich, and we didn't know about what he would do to Curtis Blades, right? We've subsequently seen those two finishes. If Stipe fights him that night, who knows how that fight goes, right? Stipe has to believe he's going to be able to beat this young guy. And who knows how that would have been. Stipe certainly would have put up a better fight, I think, than Sergey Pavlovich did against Tom Aspinall. So who knows how the whole thing would have unplayed. But what we know is this: we have John Jones versus Stipe Miocic on Saturday for the UFC Heavyweight Championship. If John wins, Lord only knows it's going to be a free for all. Does he defend against Alex Pereira? Does he get talked into fighting Aspinall, the interim champion, in what would be a phenomenal, huge, big money fight? Or does he walk away and retire? You know, I personally lean toward him retiring. That is my sense. I think, he'll probably walk away and say, I've done enough in this game. I have nothing left to prove, especially if he beats Stipe Miocic in convincing fashion. But we will have to wait and see. But I think if I were on Stipe Miocic's team, I would really be wishing that I had one fight at least somewhere in that period of time to bank on and know that I'm going to be able to handle everything that John Jones brings. Because, boy, let me tell you, that is a lot. And if you don't believe me, ask Ryan Bader, ask Shogun, ask Rampage Jackson, and all those guys that John fought in that epic run in 2011 and 2012. I have been rambling on a long time, so I will let you guys go. I hope you enjoy the fights. I hope it's a great fight card and you feel very happy. I hope we get an epic championship fight. We will talk about it all next week, no doubt about that. Let me know your comments. If you would do me a big favor, I would appreciate you subscribing to my channel, liking this video. That all means a lot. I do read your comments. I try to reply to as many as I can. I appreciate all the kind words you're saying. If you have somebody you want me to interview, if you have questions you want me to ask, I will try to do that. I can't promise you that I'm going to ask every question that you ask me to ask, and that's not a slight on your questions, but I will do my best to interview the people you want to see interviewed. I will do my best to ask the questions you want me to ask, and more than anything, I hope you guys enjoy the fights. Be well, everybody. See you soon.